Panelists, coming out of Newark, New Jersey. Definitely called upon Brother Larry because, for those who don't know, when Dr. King was assassinated in '68, Newark had a very impactful response to that assassination. And he's going to tell us a little bit about that. And hopefully we'll get the video up at some point. But if not, then we have folks who are from those areas. So welcome, Brother Larry. Larry is a longtime community activist, deals with police brutality, supports political prisoners, on and on. Definitely a revolutionary in our community. I also like to introduce Brother Jalil Muntaqim. Brother Jalil is my comrade as a veteran of the original Black Panther Party. He did over 49 years held captive in this country due to his work in the liberation struggle, with not just the Black Panther Party, but with the Black Liberation Army. And Brother Jalil is going to give us some guidance in terms of what happened after '68, which is actually the subtitle of our event, in terms of moving forward, where we go after King, after the end of what was the nonviolent civil rights movement when he was assassinated. We also have another comrade of mine, Sister Rosemari Mealy, Dr. Rosemari Mealy, also a veteran of the original Black Panther Party, coming out of Philly and then later on the New Haven chapters. Dr. Mealy is, as you see the Cuban flag in the corner, she's definitely been an advocate of continuing that solidarity between the Black New African Liberation Movement and our solidarity with revolutionary Cuba. And we know that Cuba has recognized Dr. King. She's going to tell us a little bit about that, as well as the issues about King's forgotten labor participation. And I'm sure Brother Larry also is involved with that as well. And so I want to also introduce Brother Herb Boyd. Brother Herb, Steve Elder, comes out of Detroit, another city like Newark that, for folks who don't know, when those tanks came rolling into the hood, those were two of the prime cities that were moved on by the U.S. military. And, folks talk about the idiot in the White House now and martial law and everything. We went through that already. When King was assassinated, I believe it was over 50 cities went up in flames. And that was a continuation of what took place even prior to that. Malcolm talked about it, the long, hot summers. When folks rebel, they call it riots, but it's not riots. Our people rebelling the conditions that they live under. And we're going to have them speak on that. So again, welcome, Brother Jalil, Brother Larry, Brother Herb, who also is a professor and taught at City College. We did a lot of programs together too. I don't miss if I didn't mention that. He's also a prolific writer, authored a number of books, and you can always depend on Herb to do the journalism, for the Amsterdam News. So, Brother Herb and Sister Rosemari, I'm going to open up with questions for you and for the audience that's here. Once we get that technical thing set up, what we want you to do is you put your questions in the chat, and we'll go through that when we get to that part of the program. For those of you that do get online, unfortunately, you won't be able to, but we will have this recorded and be able to come back to that. So, again, thank you, Pastor Keith. And our first question is for each of our panelists. Where were you and what do you remember about the actual day that Martin Luther King was assassinated and the U.S. urban city rebellions that followed? So I'm going to start out with Brother Herb Boyd. Brother Herb, you have the floor. Did you hear the question?
He's on mute. He's on mute.
No, I didn't have.
He's speaking.
He was fine before.
He's not on mute. Maybe
He's on
his
mute. I
ear
see the mute.
device
Oh,
isn't
now
plugged up.
he's on mute now.
Yeah.
Herb, you're on mute.
Baba Shep,
Hey,
click on
whatever
his
you did in
name.
the beginning, you were fine. When you get the test run, you were all the money. I don't know what happened now, but you're on mute.
Baba Shep, click on his name, and so it'll send him an alert that he's on mute. Find his name and click on it.
There he is. He's off now.
Okay, there you go.
I clicked on him to unmute.
Okay, Brother Herb, did you hear the question?
You probably need to plug in his headphones. They're probably out of his device. Tell him to plug in his headphone to his devices.
If you can't hear me, plug in your headphones to the device.
Plug the headphone to the device. Plug the headphone to the device. There you go. Now, fix your cord right here. Tap you on your cord by your ear. Yeah, the cord. No, the other side. Right now, the volume control on that side. The volume control. Yes, yeah, that. See if that works. No, still can't hear you. Still can't hear you.
No, we did a test run when you first came in. Everything was fine. I don't know what happened between now and then.
He don't get the headphones now.
How's that, Jalil?
There you go.
Okay, I changed earphones there. Okay.
Okay.
Okay, let's go back to 1968.
All right.
Past his prologue, as Imhotep, and we say all the time on the air with Larry. First of all, let me thank Keith for your introduction. And one of the things that really resonates out of that, Keith, for me, is that that you were the only one of the church, as I call liberation theologists, that was part of the Mumia march. Is that right?
To my knowledge.
Yes. You're probably right about that. I wouldn't doubt it, because before, I've been a part of them for years, and I visited Mumia 3 times in prison, and we've had these discussions before about how significantly involved our community is, not only in his struggle, but the overall struggle for liberation in this country. And it is kind of disturbing to learn that some of our leading thinkers, particularly coming out of the faith movement, are not actively involved, not only with Mumia, but generally not involved in our struggle. And that's been pretty much a thing. Liberation theology, when it leaked out there, I think about James Cone. I think about Gayrod Wilmore. I think about Gardner Taylor. And these individuals who were steadfast, and they probably walk right with you, Keith. They walk right with you. I have James Cone. In fact, I'm having his book. I'll hold it up right here. I don't know if you can see it at all.
Yes.
But this is my Bible for the moment. Because what he does in this book, he combines the kind of growing revolutionary trajectory of the lives of Dr. King and Malcolm, how they were converging, how they were coming together. One of the things about Dr. King, and it's always a relative thing when you talk about someone being militant or radical, compared to what? What zeitgeist, as Dr. King used to talk about, what period of time are we talking about? And whether the concept really applies in a real radical way and breaking away from the status quo. It's usually what you're saying, where people generally line up. The argument we go back and forth between who's a conservative, who's a liberal, those kind of things. Well, it's a relative thing. Depends on where you're in, what issue you're talking about, because you kind of see the vacillation that occurs quite often with our elected officials when they're saying, what issue you talking about. I was just looking at the whole conversion therapy thing that just went down. I mean, you say conversion therapy? What are we talking about? So you're talking about whether or not at a time and place, a particular issue is significantly important for the masses of people. Liberation is always significant, no matter when, no matter where. Malcolm talked about it when he had that great debate at Oxford. That was one of the things with there. And he played around with the concept very nicely. Well, Dr. King, liberation, when it came to his position as an internationalist, I think that's where the ideas of the liberation movements, how do you identify with that? Remember, Dr. King, in 1957, he went to Ghana. Mm-hmm. He was there for the whole independence movement that was going on in Ghana. Hey, 3 years later, he's in Nigeria. He was there in Nnamdi Ezekwe. So remember, he also went to India, although his mission to India was more or less to reinforce his ideas in terms of nonviolence. 1964, when he accepted the Nobel Peace Prize, we have to return to that speech, because he always had to be very careful about what he said, because people took all his words out of context, but he was often a proponent of democratic socialism. I don't know if that's breaking up or not. Is that okay, Jalil?
Yeah, you're good.
He had to be very careful about his language. All public figures should be, because once it's out there, it's left open for interpretation. And of course, if the people who see and view you in opposition, they'll probably find some kind of way to take your words out of context and make them meaningful for them. And that often happens it happens so often with Malcolm. It's amazing. Dr. King.
Brother Herb, I just want to just pop in. You actually went into one of our other questions. I don't know if you saw the list, but you started talking about the international already, which was actually our third question. But if you could just quickly tell us about 68. Where were you when that happened?
1968. Oh, I hear you, Brother Shep. In 1968, I was at Wayne State University. I had been a student and a teacher there since 1965. I was a part of a number of students who developed the Black Studies department there. I taught the first Black Studies class at Wayne State University in Detroit. People have to understand the center place that Detroit had in the whole liberation struggle in our country, the number of organizations. I mean, I can tick off at least 6 organizations that started and almost right in the vicinity, right in the neighborhood of Wayne State University. So that's where I was in 1968 when I heard it. And of course, it moved me in the same way. My mother was particularly affected by it because she called and told me when it had happened to my office. I was at Wayne State University at that time. And she was telling me, hey, have you heard the news? Well, it had been out there several hours before it was actually announced, because the actual shooting occurred, and then later on, they had to confirm it. Just like what's going on right now with the whole war between Israel, the U.S. and Iran. I mean, how many planes were shot down, for example. They have to hold up on that until they get full clarification of that. Same way with Malcolm's assassination. You had to wait and fully understand exactly what had happened before word got out. So I'm here at Wayne State University in 1968, 3 years, I've been there 3 years. I started teaching in there in 1965. Even before I had graduated, I started teaching at Wayne State University. The class I taught, the first class I taught there, Brother Shep, I used Malcolm X's book, The Autobiography of Malcolm X. I had met Malcolm 4 years before. And man, I mean, meeting him turned my whole life around. Dr. King and the whole struggle that was going on with the civil rights movement didn't hit me until later on because I was a Malcolmite. And there was all these differences between Malcolm and Martin and the whole civil rights movement, the so-called Big Six, as they called them back then. So we took exception to the kind of analysis and strategies and tactics that they were proposing, particularly along the lines of nonviolent. So here you go. You got that kind of distinction that kind of resonates with me very strongly. And even to this day, I have the understanding that my mother, who was a Dr. King advocate, we had some strong discussions because of where I stood with Malcolm, where she stood with Martin, and particularly after both of them, 39 years of age, are taken dramatically and tragically from us. So the question and the short answer I have for you, I was at Wayne State University teaching a course on African American history and African liberation movements at the time that Dr. King was assassinated.
All right, thank you, Herman. At some point, we're going to figure out what happened in the streets of Detroit. Which is the second part of that question. But I want to move on to Brother Larry from Newark. Again, that was one of the other centerpieces of the occupation, put it to you that way. And I just want to say personally myself, Larry, you and I actually were born in '54, the same year.
Oh, yeah.
So I don't remember too much about what happened on that day because I was just 13. Except that they wouldn't let me leave the house.
Wow.
You know, I had to watch everything on TV and deal with that. But could you tell us about Newark? You know, what happened there?
Okay. Well, first of all, I'm 1 year older than you, Shep. I've seen things written that say I was born in '54. I don't know why people be making up stuff. I was actually born in '53, but I was born at the end of I was born December '53, so maybe that's where people, when they do the math, they're trying to make the math, you know. So, but my first acquaintance with Dr. King was in 1964. Now, in 1964, I was probably about 10 years old.
Mm-hmm.
And I lived in an extended family. My father died when I was 4, so my mother went back to live with her grandparents. My grandmother's sister lived with us. We had another cousin living with us, all in our second floor apartment. But my Aunt Joan was a live-in domestic. And the people that she worked for would give her stuff and she would bring it home. And one weekend she brought home this record. It was an album and it was a recording of Dr. King's speech, but not the I Have a Dream speech. This album, the title of it was In the Struggle for Freedom and Human Dignity. And it was the speech that Dr. King gave when he returned from Oslo, having received the Nobel Peace Prize. So I'm listening to this on my little fold out record, record player. Remember the fold out ones with the little speakers? I had never heard any talk like that. I had been to church. I'd heard preaching, but I had never heard anybody talk like that. And even as a 10-year-old, I was struck by this and forever affected. Now, did it like immediately cause a blossoming of my political consciousness? No. But I clearly understood what Dr. King was talking about. He was talking about helping poor people. And that was my people because we lived in the heart of the Central Ward and we were poor. So I understood that. So I had some acquaintance with Dr. King by 1968. Now, prior to 1968, there was the 1967 Newark Rebellion. A black cab driver named John Smith was stopped by police on Springfield and Fairmount. In the Central Ward of Newark, they beat him nearly to death. They took him to the 17th Avenue precinct, which was in the center of the Hayes Homes housing project. So you could just look out your window and see them bringing this guy in. And that precinct had such a reputation that people came in, they were usually carried out. And what happened was a lot of people thought that Smith had been killed. And so there was a demonstration in front of the police precinct. The cops rushed out on the demonstrators, and that's what started the rebellion in 1967. Rebellion only greater in dimension by the Detroit Rebellion. In Newark, the 1,300 police force couldn't put it down. They called in 700 troopers. The combined troopers and police couldn't put it down. Then Governor Hughes declared martial law and sent in 1,500 National Guard. And these guard, we were under occupation. The Guard had a checkpoint set up right at the intersection of my street, 12th Street and 16th Avenue. They had tanks, literally. You can actually see pictures. Like, you just go online and look up Newark Rebellion, and you'll see the tanks sitting out in front of a church, tanks sitting in the community. You know, it was a military occupation. And that was because I came from regular people. I don't think my people even were members of the NAACP. My mother was a seamstress. She worked in the cleaners around the corner. My father, before he died, was a truck driver. He drove Mack trucks. My grandfather was a boiler man. They didn't never, the only thing I heard them say about King before he was assassinated, my grandfather was watching TV one night and they were talking about Dr. King's position on Vietnam, right? And my grandfather said, King need to stick to civil rights. And that was the power, of the media. And I'm gonna tell you, that wasn't an uncommon, assessment of King, because a lot of our people parrot what the media says, So I was 14, I was a freshman. It was the spring of my freshman year in 1968 when Dr. King was assassinated. And what struck me about the assassination of Dr. King was the difference between how the schools treated the assassination of Dr. King from the assassination of John Kennedy. Now, I was in elementary school when Kennedy was assassinated in 1963. They closed schools early. They didn't even care about the parents having the kid. Half day, go home. The president's been assassinated. And then when we came back, we had auditorium programs tell us how great John Kennedy was and how terrible it was, the assassination. Man, when Dr. King was assassinated, it was crickets. Crickets. In the school I'm talking about. I'm not talking about in the house and in the community, but in the school. That's what struck me the most. And then the other thing I have to do is give credit to Amiri Baraka, because I really didn't know about King's philosophy and everything. I mean, I had heard that record. I knew he was a good man and I knew he wanted to help poor people. But Amiri Baraka's headquarters was the next corner from my school. Arts High School was called today Martin Luther King Boulevard, then it was called High Street. Amiri Baraka's first headquarters was Hikalu Umoja, House of Unity, and it was on the corner of Springfield Avenue and High Street. And right next to his headquarters, he had a bookstore, Nyumba Ya Ujima, House of Cooperative Economics. And I would have to pass his joint every day, going back and forth to school. So finally, in my senior year, I went into Nyumba Ya and I bought 2 books. Herb Boyd, I bought Malcolm X Speaks, and in 1971, when I bought it, when I graduated, it was $1.95. And I bought Where Do We Go From Here, Chaos or Community. I bought those 2 books. Now, don't ask me why. Now, as kids, we were more with Malcolm. I'm gonna tell you. I mean, even though I knew about King and I like King and everything, the young people was down with Malcolm. And I had to listen to Malcolm X. I had bought a record album also out of Nayumbia. It was By Any Means Necessary, but it wasn't the whole speech. It was an album titled By Any Means Necessary with excerpts like the best of Malcolm X. And man, I had to listen to that record album in my basement because my mother was like, she didn't want to hear it, you know. So I had to go down, and it wasn't even like our basement. We lived in a 3-family house. But I wanted to hear what Brother Malcolm had to say. So that's where I was, and that's where my mind was at that time when Dr. King was assassinated.
All right. Thank you, Barry. And you guys have so much to offer. We got to do some special programming, just in terms of what y'all have to say. Sister Rosemari, comrade.
Oh,
Same
thank you.
question. Where were you in 1968, and what do you remember happened when King was assassinated?
Oh, yes, and I'll try to be disciplined about the time. And thank you for having me on as the only sister here for this. I appreciate that. I was a single parent living in Philadelphia, and my son had. I grew up in the Black church tradition that the minister spoke about, and so therefore, I had, by the time that that Dr. King passed, of course, my family was, they were all upset about it, and like most Black people were. And I really understand what Brother Larry is saying. So I had moved away from traditional the traditional Black religion, pretty much heading in the direction of embracing my current philosophical perspectives, i.e., being a Marxist-Leninist. And because my barometer is, my son was born 3 days after Malcolm was assassinated. So therefore, I became a child of Malcolm, right? So remembering in Philadelphia, I knew about the rebellions that were happening in North Philly, but I it was like drawing on Malcolm's philosophy. The chickens had come home to roost, in a sense, beyond what he mentioned when Kennedy was assassinated. So for me, it was a sad moment, of course, because I knew that, because he comes out, as all these ministers and as many of our dear ministers who come out of the tradition of liberation theology, the whole idea is that they stress ethics. And I would have to say that, my affinities toward Dr. King, even though I didn't agree with his philosophy, the nonviolent philosophy, I respected him for those ethics, the ethics of providing, challenging racism, number one, and also the fact of his whole idea of challenging the state in terms of capitalism. I mean, people weren't calling it that, but my political orientation was understanding that it was capitalism that killed him, and so for me, those moments back then just helped to affirm the political direction that I would take in all the trajectories of my life up to this point. I was very clear about the politics of this country, and so his assassination affirmed that for me. And moving forward, I can just relate to other questions that you have for us.
Okay. Thank you, Sister Rosemary. Brother Jalil, where were you 1968, and what do you remember happening?
First of all, let me give my greetings. First of all, let me thank you, Shep, for inviting me to this prestigious panel. Assalamu alaikum, peace, paz, Americani, Jumbo, Hotep, Erin, Hafa Adea, Guten Tag, Shalom, Hopin, whatever your native language, I wish you peace and solidarity. Thank you for the opportunity again. I'll make it brief, I'll make it very short. 1968, when the Dr. Martin Luther King was assassinated, I was in juvenile hall. I was in juvenile hall. Why was in juvenile hall? Because we went out to retaliate as a young kid, right? And myself and three of our young brothers and two of our elders or older comrades, we got busted in the car with Molotov cocktails and shotguns, right? And so we were sent to juvenile hall at the age of 16, going on 17, right? It has also been a member of the Black Panther Party, right? And so we went into marching into juvenile hall singing, what was it? Well, we had a little chant, bang bang, bow bow, Martin Luther King is dead, and wow. There was another one that we had that was going in there, defiant, right? Young brothers who was about the business as much as we could be in understanding. But mostly it was an emotional response, right? Although the elder brothers who had the ornaments, right, ornaments, because we didn't have, in fact, the situation was that we was walking down the street looking for something to do, and they saw us walking down the street, told us to get off the streets, right? So let's get off the streets because they get ready to take care of some business. And so we got in the car, and so we got pulled over, right? And then naturally there was a scuffle because they was illegally search and seizure, and that's how we all got off anyway. Illegal search and seizure, no reason for them to come, and at that time they adhered to the law to that extent, and that's how we got off. Plus the high school students in our area, I was the chairman of the Black Student Union in a high school that I had established. Me and some other brothers established. There wasn't no teaching of Black history at that time, right? So we had to fighting for establishing Black student unions and establishing Black curriculum in our schools. And so the students, when they found out we was in juvenile hall, they marched, right, to juvenile hall calling for our release. Right? I didn't know what political prison was at that time, but apparently, that's the reality. Okay, so you had asked the question about 1968, brother, and the assassination of beloved brother Martin Luther King Jr. That's where I was, bro. Right. I was in the thick of things. By circumstances out of my control, I ended up in juvenile hall. But I was out in the streets looking to do what I had to do. All right. So as many of us young people across the country was engaged at that time, who set it off. Dr. Martin Luther King was more than just a spiritual leader. He was, as James Cone says, he's a liberation theologist, right? He believed in freeing our people, right? But not only freeing our people, but freeing people around the world, right? He was also an internationalist, in as much as we would identify today as being a Pan-Africanist, right? Following the traits of Marcus Garvey, following in the similar line of development of Malcolm X, because there was a point in time where they agreed to disagree, okay? And that in itself was a means from which they developed an understanding of unity in regards to their relationship to one another. But when we get to the next question, I'm going to leave that there. When we get to the next question, I'm going to talk a little bit more about a speech, a statement that Dr. Martin Luther King made that is resonant to what we are conditioned and what we're dealing with today. With that, I yield.
Thank you, Brother Jalil. And second question is, what was the direct relationship between Martin Luther King with the U.S. labor movement, and both his speaking out and planned actions against the negative effects of the U.S. capitalist system on Black, Brown, and the poor? Let's start out, Sister Rosemari.
Well, the fact that he was assassinated, and our brother Larry, I'm sure, will talk about that. He was assassinated because of his commitment to Black working class struggles, i.e., the struggles that were taking place in Memphis at the time, and the American Federation of State, County, Municipal Service Employees were great backers of Dr. King, and he also supported the labor movement. I was not in the labor movement at that time when he was assassinated, but ending up years ago, I ended up teaching labor studies and labor history. And also I worked for District Council 37 of ASME, and just really began the same way that, your viewpoints and your ideas expand. I mean, that happened to me by participating in the labor movement and being a labor organizer. You began to see that his sincerity had then expanded in the context of how liberation theology is not just about speaking inside of the church, but to be actively involved with your sheep. You have to be actively involved. I mean, that's the whole point. And then, of course, I later started working with the with IFCO, Pastors for Peace, led by Reverend Lucius Walker, during the time of, well, this is in later years, but we began to study and understand the history again of the role of Dr. King in just being an anti-imperialist. And I think that Herb mentioned his internationalism, and you began to see why this society, why this country, and why the media in this country reached a level for depoliticizing him. And I know that that is a question that you have, and I think that we should really spend some time on that, and because they tried to create this image for us, as they do now. And so therefore you were always struggling against the dominant image that's being projected by the corporate press, when in reality, you're seeing this man leading struggles that are speaking to the needs of working class people in this country. So, and we should always remember that we have to raise that up when we talk about him, because when we talk about him as an internationalist, we also have to understand his writings and understand his preachings, that he was really an anti-imperialist. And when I teach, I really stress that, and you provide examples to that. So he was a supporter of the labor movement, and the labor movement supported him. And it's too bad now that there is this separation between our struggles and the labor movement in this country, which has become nothing more than a pawn of the imperialist class. So in that context, we have to raise his name up as important to pushing forward the labor movement in this country, and the goals of working class people in this country as a part of the broader anti-imperialist struggle, or the struggle against empire, as we are with at this point, that has boiled down really to being a struggle against fascism.
Thank you. Thank you, Sister Rosemary. Larry, and then Herb.
Well, I think Dr. Mealy really put a good theoretical framework, a political and analytical framework on Dr. King with regard to his relationship to the working class. It's really odd that you raised this question, because I'm sitting here at the Lorraine Motel National Civil Rights Museum. I'm in Memphis right now. I'm in the center. And I don't know if everybody, I will assume that all of you probably have been here, got here before I did, because this is the first time I've ever been here. But they actually have kiosks in the plaza. Before you get to the doorway, there are these kiosks. And you remember those signs the brothers carry, "I am a man"? Each of the kiosks has this silhouette of them on one side, but on the other side are television screens, and you tap the television screens, and each one tells the story of the Black sanitation workers in Memphis and their struggle and what they were going through, not just when Dr. King got there, what they were going through before Dr. King got there, because that struggle had been going on for some time with the sanitation. Long history, a long historical relationship. And when I say long, we got to qualify that, because Dr. King's leadership, like the Dr. King we know, was only 13 years. 13 years from 55, the beginning of the Montgomery bus boycott, until 68 when he was assassinated. That's not a long, long time. I mean, relatively speaking, it might be a long time, but in the course of history, in the course of the civil rights movement, it's a moment. But you know, it goes back to that saying, a year can seem like a lifetime, and a lifetime can seem like a year, depending on the political circumstances. But remember, Dr. King was offered the leadership of the Montgomery Improvement Association, and he refused it. Who offered it to him? E.D. Nixon. Who was E.D. Nixon? He was the president of the Montgomery branch of the NAACP. Who was the secretary? Rosa Parks. But beyond being the president of the NAACP, who was E.D. Nixon? He was a Pullman car porter. He was one of the senior members of that union. That was a union. The Pullman car porters, they were a union, the first all-black union, because they were all black, the porters, you know. And E.D. Nixon chose King. King didn't want to initially. He went to King, I think, twice. The first time King refused, the second time King accepted. And then when you get to the March on Washington, like we all listen to the I Have a Dream. I shouldn't say we, because I know we talking to veteran strugglers, right? But most people have only heard the I Have a Dream speech. I remember back in the 70s, I bought a tape. Remember when people made tapes? You know, like the little cassette tapes? I bought a tape off a street vendor, which had all the speeches that were given at the 1963 March on Washington. And I would really urge folks to listen to all the speeches, not just Dr. King's speech. And many people think Dr. King called the march. No, Dr. King didn't call the March on Washington. A. Philip Randolph called the March on Washington. He tried to call a march in the 40s. He threatened Roosevelt, unless Roosevelt desegregated the military, the industries, the armaments industries, the defense industries. Randolph was going to march, but then Roosevelt issued that executive order to desegregate those industries, and Randolph called off the march. He called that march on the Great March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom. And, you know, they made Dr. King kind of like the keynote speaker. He was the last speaker of the day. I think there were 12 speakers on the program. Wasn't like we do with 20, 30, and 40 speakers. You know, they had 12 speakers, and that was it. And so, you know, and then Dr. King had particular relationships with particular unions. Like he used to talk about 1199 all the time. And also here, it was AFSCME that was that became the group that unionized the sanitation workers. They were trying to get a local of AFSCME here against the will. The city didn't want them unionized. The city they were fighting really the city of Memphis, the politicians, but they won, and they got that local organized. But, you know, just an aside, I would really urge people, in terms of understanding that this relationship with labor, to go back and look at Ivan Dixon's movie. Y'all remember that movie Nothing But a Man with Ivan Dixon? And what was the sister's name?
Abby Lincoln.
Abby Lincoln, thank you. That's some movie, because it's about a labor struggle. It's about him trying to organize the men. What was that in the timber plant, at the mill? They were at the mill, and he was trying to organize them. And the opening scene is a group of Pullman car porters, you know, talking to each other. So that's just some thoughts I have on that.
Thank you, Larry. Brother Herb, you have anything with the labor? His anti-imperial, well, anti-capitalist stance on working with the poor?
Okay. Well, I think you pretty much covered the ground there with Rosemary and Larry. Of course, the sanitation workers and Larry is right down there, right in the heart of it, and the museum and everything there at Lorraine. What strikes me about Dr. King is how he related generally to the labor movement and to labor itself, because he felt that anytime there's any kind of dignity and nobility, it comes out of the people who really who lift up. It's uplifted by this labor, and he feel that he had to do something about that situation. The UAW, of course, AFSCME, to say nothing of the Teamsters, all the labor movements identified with the civil rights movement to a certain degree. And certainly the UAW, coming out of Detroit as I did, we saw how the labor movement, it was pretty much the modus operandi, you might say. Everything centered on around the factories there. So Dr. King recognized this. When he came to Detroit in 1963, now this is before the historic march in Washington.
Right.
In fact, the 1963 march was like a dress rehearsal, a dry run leading up to that event. And you can see him with Walter Reuther walking down Woodward Avenue, and with religious leaders too, Keith. We had 3 religious leaders who were walking with the labor movement, was walking with Dr. King on his way to Cobo Hall to deliver that speech, which of course the speech he gave there was also kind of a rehearsal, because some of the things he talked about in Detroit, he reiterated when he got to Washington, D.C. So you understand how he moves from one place to another, getting his thoughts together. And the labor movement was always very helpful in having him understand exactly where things were because of the economic situation in this country. And he touched on that in his Riverside, on the Riverside Street. I don't know if I'm coming through. But in effect, Brother Shep, I think, we've covered that pretty well. We can go on to the next question because our time, is we don't have that much time. They got a lot of ground to cover.
Okay, I want to go to Brother Jalil. You have anything to add to that? To labor and capitalism and poor and so forth.
Yeah, I think it's very important for us to understand the trauma that we have suffered as a result of this dynamic, particularly in regards to him going to Memphis to support the sanitation workers and the placard that they wore, or that placard they wore. Do you remember that placard what it read? Right, what it stated? Right, I am a man. Why? Why would any one of us need to wear a placard to indicate that they are a human being, a man? Why? Because of the level of dehumanization, the level of demeaning, the level of devaluing of Black, brown, and indigenous people in this country, right? So that's an episode that we can definitively state that we've been dehumanized. Definitively state that there's a necessity for us to organize to uplift our humanity, all right? And Dr. King understood that, right? Not only he understood that, but he suffered all the ills and all of the trauma as would our beloved Messiah Jesus Christ, right? As he was going to the cross, right? Walking to the cross, carrying the burden of going to the cross. So did Martin Luther King, right? Uplifting the ideas of what did Jesus Christ do? He kicked over the change tables, changing the tables. That's anti-capitalism. That's anti-usury, right? So let's understand the spirit of what we're talking about here, right? And trying to lift up people's humanity. That was Dr. King's legacy, and the idea of a theological liberation theology, and the principles of where it comes from and where it evolves from. But more than that is the question of this here, and this is the idea of I don't know how much time I got left, right? But I need to address one particular issue very importantly about Dr. King, right, and his legacy, right? In one of his speeches, right, Dr. King talked about genocides, right? And I want to read that quote from him and then expound just a little bit and put it in context of what we're dealing with today, right? Our nation was born in genocide when it embraced the doctrine that of the original American, the Indian, who was inferior race. What's inferior race? Even before there were large numbers of Negroes on our shore, the scar of racial hatred had already disfigured colonial society. From the 6th century forward, blood flowed in battles over racial supremacy. We are perhaps the only nation which tried as a matter of national policy to wipe out its indigenous population. Moreover, we elevated the tragic experience into a noble crusade. Indeed, even today, we have not permitted ourselves to reject or feel remorse for this shameful episode. Our literature, our films, our drama, our folklore all exalt it. Our children are still taught to respect the violence that reduced red-skinned people to an earlier culture into a few fragmented groups herded into impoverished reservations. When we look at the Black population today, that's where we are. We're herded into impoverished reservations, right? Anywhere you look in the Black communities in this country, the majority of it is an impoverished community, ghettos, slums, etc. That's not by our own discretion. That's imposed upon us by a system of capitalism, right? Where the rich see hoarded profits and wealth, right, to the detriment of the poor and the disenfranchised. Okay, so when we look at that, we understand why he talked about this nation is a what? It is a genocidal nation. It never has not been. This, as I state the fact that this nation is a slave nation. It never has not been. This is a slave nation by law. Subject to the United States Constitution. When they ended chattel slavery in 1865 with the 13th Amendment, right? That state that slavery and voluntary servitude should not exist except for those who were duly convicted of a crime, the exception clause, in the same ink, on the same paper, at the same time by the same white men, right? Ended chattel slavery, started penal slavery. So when was slavery abolished? Never was. From chattel to penal, same time, same date, same ink, same paper. So when was slavery abolished in this country? Never was. We live in a slave nation, and they know it. Those who control this country today, they know it. Like they said, the South will rise again. Well, it's risen. They're here. These are enslavers and mass incarcerators. These are enslavers and mass murderers who run this country today. They believe in genocide. We see what's going on in this country, and not only in this country, but in Palestine. They sponsored that genocide. Okay, so when Dr. King talked about our nation was born in genocide, right? Understand that that's how we're living today. And that's the reason why we had the national mobilization against genocide on July 4th, 2026 in Atlanta, Georgia. Right? In 1951, December 17, 1951, the great Paul Robeson, the great W.D. Du Bois, the great William Patton first petition to the United Nations in regards to genocides. Right? 1951, right? 1964, 64, Malcolm X talked about genocides in his speech. Moving to the grassroots, talking about genocides. Dr. King talked about genocides. All right, that's what we're confronting. All right, so when we want to express love for Dr. King, we want to celebrate Dr. King, celebrate his work. Right? Celebrate his understanding of what we engaged in today, right? And the necessity for us to follow in those footsteps, to be anti-capitalist, right? To be a pro-humanitarian for all the world, not just for ourselves, right? To be internationalist. Okay. That is the spirit of Dr. King.
Actually, you're taking
with that, I yield. I'm sorry, brother. I yield. But hey.
All right,
understand the love that we have for our people and the necessity for us to engage in this work. Thank you.
All right, folks, I just got a word. We are finally on YouTube, so we are being live streamed, and we did get the information that we didn't show earlier. So we'll try to fit in that short 12-minute video as well as some slides on what both Herb and Larry were talking about in terms of the tanks and so forth. But we're going to get it together. We got everything here now. We just got to fit it in. So let me go to the next question, which actually some of you already touched on it already. So if you did speak on it already, you could just pass on to the next person. So in what ways did Martin Luther King begin to oppose U.S. imperialism and embrace internationalist solidarity with oppressed people in the world? Then we have two questions after that, and then we'll open up for Q&A. Herb, you want to start with that one?
Rosemary got her hand up. She got
okay, go ahead, Rosemary. Yeah,
I would like to just, I would like to say something. I would encourage people to read Why America May Go to Hell. This is the speech that Dr. King would have given the day after he was assassinated. And in that speech, he frames all of this that we're talking about here today, and it is seminal in the sense that it's a teaching moment. And I think that because because Dr. King was sanitized, you know, in everything that he did, it's our responsibility to unveil and clean it up and to present the truth. So I just wanted to share that because he even talks about in that speech why America may go to hell. He's reflecting on, again, going back to the sanitation workers. You know, he's not only talking about workers struggling for their right to work, but he's also talking about people who are underemployed, you know, because you know you can be employed, but you need a living wage. And again, I'm sorry, I have to go back and fill that in, because that's very important. That it was not just a struggle to support the sanitation workers, but it was also a struggle for a living wage for all workers in this country. Okay, now quickly I'll go to the international question. The international question, again, because he's been sanitized in terms of his teaching, you know, you don't get the full picture. You just get little snippets of particular speeches. You know, like when we say the war, and I'm glad that I think Herb pointed this out. When we say or maybe it was Larry, the March on Washington. You know, it was not just a march on Washington. It had context. You know, it was a march for economic justice, against racism, raising the question of militarization. Okay, so, but the way in which the press has presented it over the years and even now, you know, we still get the sanitized version of this person. And I think one of the most important things, and our brother Jalil has raised this too, his speech at Riverside Church on why we must oppose the war in Vietnam. You know, that is the foundation in many instances of his theoretical understanding coming together and framing the international question. And lastly, I just want to share that it's not so much about what we believe in Dr. King and what we're talking about here today, but it's also the influence that he had around the world. And that's important. Number one, I don't know if you all know about this. In Cuba, in Havana, Cuba, there is the Martin Luther King Center. And next door is the Ebenezer Baptist Church. And that talking about the whole question of liberation theology, which also began in Latin America in many instances, Brazil, and Paulo Freire, people like that, and then bringing it here and aligning it with our whole prophecy around the whole question of religion. But it's important that Martin Luther King is studied and he's revered around the world. Also, in Cuba, there is a park. It's called the Malcolm Martin Luther King Park. On one side of the statue is a picture of Malcolm, and on the other side is this bronze picture of Martin Luther King. So not only is his teachings taught here, but I dare say he's not sanitized in Cuba. Okay. So I just wanted to bring that out because a lot of times, because of the information blockade, and Herb, you really need to do a story. I've been trying to get a hold of you about what's going on there now. I use this opportunity. But we need to understand that, here is a country 90 miles away from us who represents the citadel of internationalism, and the church in this country needs to step up because there's an oil blockade and our Black brothers and sisters are hungry, and some of them are dying because they can't get medical care. They can't get the resources because they're denied it on the international market. If we want to talk about doing something now, we have to address what is happening in not just in Cuba, but also in Africa. And Martin Luther King would be telling us to do that and leading pilgrimages, taking delegations, the church taking delegations, doing things like that. Thank you. Thank you for allowing me to kind of say that. And I know I covered 2 or 3 issues, but I know we were running out of time.
Right on the money. Brother Herb, you're on mute. You're still on mute. Nope. Whatever you did before, you need to do it again because we can't hear you.
Okay, I just clicked the button to ask him to unmute, so maybe that'll help.
There you go.
There you go. Speak.
Is that unmuted now?
I think.
Okay.
Yep. Go ahead.
Well, what Rosemari is kind of a preface to some of the concerns that I have about the question. And of course, I've said it before, is that the internationalism of Dr. King began to really take place and to solidify in his travels abroad. And that is particularly going in 1957, he goes to Ghana for the independence celebration there. 3 years later, he's in Nigeria for their independence celebration. In Oslo in 1964 for the Nobel Peace Prize in Norway. So I think the internationalism has much to do with his politicization, his awakening. He still was a long way from a class analysis, but he was, you have to understand that Malcolm and Martin were only 39 years of age. They were still growing and developing in their analysis and their understanding. Obviously, he, as a student at Boston, at the Boston College of Theology School there, he had approached the ideas of democratic socialism. It didn't settle in for him because he's moving more and more. He's growing, he's maturing, he's trying to understand the world and everything. But when he gets to 1967 at Riverside Church, that Rosemari touched on, 3 things were very significant about that speech: poverty, racism, and militarism. And he dwelled on and showed the interrelationship, the connection between those 3 things. Let me stop right there. I know the time is running out on, and that's pretty much how I feel about his growing anti-capitalism, anti-imperialism, and his kind of shifting slowly, gradually growing into a socialist perspective.
Anyone else before we move?
That's it, Brother Shep. Okay.
I got you. Okay, we have one more question, and then we're going to have the final wrap up, and then we're going to see if we can squeeze in a couple of questions. But I'm going to be working with Ryan. He has the video that's 12 minutes long. We're supposed to show that at the very beginning, which actually has some of his speeches, which I thought. So we'll probably throw that on at the end, folks who want to just listen to that and really get a good idea of what he was talking about. Particularly that check he was talking about that wasn't cashed. He speaks on that. I think that definitely goes towards that. He also talks about the youth and how they are becoming revolutionaries, and the whole question about where he actually quoted from Kennedy that, if nonviolent revolution is not accepted, I'm paraphrasing, then violent revolution will come to pass. Which is what we talked about in terms of how we move forward from the whole nonviolent movement. But let me read the next to last question. The last question, of course, is going to be which way forward, and exposing, teaching, and carrying on the revolutionary legacy of Martin Luther King beyond the cheek-turning dream persona. But the question is, what role did the U.S. government play in the influencing of the public criticism and the abandonment by Negroes of the civil rights movement of Martin Luther King during his final days? Start out with Jalil.
Repeat that question one more time, bro. Can you
Should I
hear me?
repeat that?
Yeah, please.
Okay, I'm going to repeat that just to make it clear. What role did the U.S. government play in the influencing of the public criticism and the abandonment by Negroes of the civil rights movement of Martin Luther King during his final days?
Well, I think it's important for us to understand that Martin Luther King was always under attack by the FBI, CIA, and other law enforcement, quote unquote, law enforcement agencies.
Yep.
He was a target of COINTELPRO, counterintelligence program. The counterintelligence program was established, I think, in 1920, right, against the American Socialist Party or something of that nature, right? But before that, J. Edgar Hoover, who was an agent at the time, in 1920, targeted Marcus Garvey, right? And as a result of his targeting Marcus Garvey, then he came up with this idea, and years later, when he became the director, of trying to prevent the rise of a Messiah. Okay, because he understood what Marcus Garvey was able to achieve, being one of the greatest organizers in our contemporary time, having organized UNIA in Latin America, Africa, the Caribbeans, in England, as well as in the United States. And so as a result of that, COINTELPRO had one of his dictates was to prevent the rise of the Messiah. And they recognized both Dr. Martin Luther King and Malcolm X as potentially being that Messiah. So therefore, as a result of the history of J. Edgar Hoover in the FBI, he targeted Dr. King in every type of way that he possibly can, try to discredit. One of the principles of the COINTELPRO was to discredit, right, militants, we say militant or organizational individuals from the status quo of Black population, right? The petty bourgeoisie, the middle class, in other words, the upper class, right? To discredit their positions, our positions in struggle. And so they tried to discredit Dr. King. When we talk about as an example, the March on Washington, as you might remember, the March on Washington was all Black at one point in time. And they called the Big Six into the White House and told them they were writing this stuff up, as Martin Luther, as Malcolm X and Hassan Shabazz talked about, that it was all Black. And they added a little milk to it, right, and to this coffee, this Black coffee. They added a little milk to it, they added a little sugar to it, and changed the dynamics of what it was actually originally was. That was a tactic of COINTELPRO. That's a tactic of the government to remove Dr. King from a Black national or nationalist perspective, right, and keep it homogenous in that way, marginalize it in that sense, make it as an issue of assimilation and integration rather than a separation and independence. And so when we look at the whole dynamics of Dr. King's journey, right, we can see that he was under attack as from the very beginning, right? As we all are, as all of our leaders have been under attack, right, and either imprisoned or assassinated. From the point of the murder of the Reverend Dr. The Reverend Nat Turner, to the point of Medgar Evers being murdered and assassinated and killed. The running into exile of James Farmer, the murder of Dr. King, and many others. We can go on for days in terms of how our people, how our leaders are being crucified, right, under the crucible of white supremacy, right, and the ideas of white supremacy and the system of capitalist imperialism. So when we, again, I would urge people to go and read the Ward Churchill's study on COINTELPRO and the documents of COINTELPRO, and there you will find how, to what the extent that Dr. King was targeted by this government. With that, I yield.
Brother Larry.
Coretta Scott King, Dr. King's wife, took the federal government to court. She sued the federal government regarding the assassination of her husband in federal court. I believe it was in Georgia. And my understanding is that she didn't sue for millions of dollars. She sued for $1 because what she was suing for was to try to get the truth out on the assassination. And based on what I read, it wasn't just the FBI, that the court record says that there were 11 intelligence agencies and the Memphis police involved in the conspiracy to kill Martin Luther King. I mean, you could do volumes on the FBI. Hoover was obsessed with King. He said King was the most dangerous Negro in America and called him a notorious liar. He was obsessed with him, but it wasn't just, I mean, if we leave it to the FBI, I don't think we'll have the full picture. I mean, there was a case, there was an outcome to the case. It was brought by his wife, and they said 11 intelligence agencies, the Army intelligence, and all the other. Like right now, I think we have in the United States 17. Is it 17? We got so many intelligence agencies that they had to create the czar. That's the position that Tulsi Gabbard has now. What is it, National Security Czar? Because there's so many damn intelligence agencies. But they were all involved. And it wasn't just to stop a Messiah. They wanted to stop the movement. I think they killed King for several reasons. And there are probably multiple reasons why they killed King, but we certainly know two, right? One reason was his opposition to the war in Vietnam, which he came to in a very hard way. You know, SNCC, first of all, Malcolm preceded all of them in opposition to the war in Vietnam. SNCC came on board, I think, in 1963. John Lewis was the designated youth speaker at the March on Washington because he was the president of SNCC. They edited John Lewis's speech because he was going to condemn the war in Vietnam. You can actually see online, you can go online, look it up and see the part that they took out. So they attacked him because of his anti-imperialism. The exemplar of that was his opposition to the war in Vietnam. And I think in the end they attacked him because Dr. King in the last year was mounting a full frontal attack on capitalism. A full frontal attack on capitalism. I mean, see, I know of 6 books that Dr. King wrote, right? Measure of a Man, Stride Toward Freedom, Strength to Love, Why We Can't Wait, Where Do We Go From Here, Chaos or Community, and Trumpet of Conscience. And when you read those books, you can say, yes, Dr. King evolved. That would be a truism. But the other thing is, there's a lot of consistency in Dr. King, especially when you read Stride Toward Freedom, which was about the real struggle that was going on. It wasn't the only account of the Montgomery bus boycott. It was his account. Diane Nash had an account. Fred Gray had another book, and so on and so forth. But you see a lot of consistency. And we know that in letters that he wrote to Coretta, before they were married, he said he leaned towards socialism. You know, but And then there's the third thing. It was not only that he was anti-imperialist, it was not only he was anti-capitalist, but it was also because people were listening to him. I just did a thing, and I'm gonna stop with this. I just did a thing with St. James AME Church in Newark. The pastor there, Reverend Slaughter, asked me, didn't even come out of POP or from me. The preacher approached me and he said, Brother Larry, I want you to come in and do 3 sessions on where do we go from here, chaos of the community. Take my congregation through. So we had 3 Wednesdays, and he told the whole congregation to come. And a lot of them came. I was surprised. I thought it was going to be a group of us sitting around the table. But I think if every church did that, I think it would do a lot to help raise the consciousness of our people. If every church would say, look, we're going to take, and he did it in the month of March. I don't know why, not maybe because too much was going on Black History Month, but he did it in the month of March. I mean, I think we need that kind of renaissance, a renaissance where we re-examine the work of Dr. King, we re-examine Malcolm X. I mean, we should be treating Malcolm X Speaks like a lot of people say, read autobiography. I'm down with that, but I'm more down with reading what Malcolm said, Malcolm's speeches, and in the same way that King was evolving, Malcolm was evolving. When you read those speeches at the Audubon, they're a lot different than the speeches he was giving before 1963. They were more anti-imperialist, and they were more, and Malcolm said, find me a capitalist and I'll find you a bloodsucker. So I'll just leave it there.
Brother Herb?
That is a question that has been resonating for years now, since he was killed. And they put together commissions and committees, and there's no definitive answer on that. All we recognize the fact that, first of all, he's a Black man and he was killed by a white man. So you have to put that in context. He was growing in his analysis. I mean, Memphis was an indication that, the whole identification with the sanitation workers, a kind of a class analysis was taking shape. In other words, he's beginning to see it was a little bit more than just race. The class is a component of what was going on in his development. His international perspective was growing. In other words, his ideas were coming closer and closer to those that Malcolm had already presented. Of course, Malcolm, is gone 3 years before, so it's no kind of unification there. But the followers of Malcolm, the followers of Dr. King, are beginning to incorporate those ideas in their overall analysis in terms of moving forward and giving the liberation movement a little bit more analysis and room for understanding and what should be the strategies and tactics as we move forward. So, I mean, it remains a question in terms of why he was taken from us. But I think it has something to do with his international perspective, in the same way with Malcolm, with the CIA and the FBI and government agencies concerned about the growing analysis and understanding of where the world was and how the whole third world movement out there, their connection with that, it cannot be ignored. But I think it's really the understanding that economic justice was a concern that he had, concern about poverty, concern about the war in Vietnam. All of those things kind of came together in such a way that made him a larger target. I don't know, James Earl Ray, and his people have argued about whether it was a lone assassination, was he alone in all that? But there was so much to be said, and the government has still not uncovered, unsealed all the documents that the CIA and the FBI gathered on Dr. King and Malcolm X. We're waiting to get the full disclosure of that package. They talk about, well, maybe in another 25 years that they'll begin to deal something with all the redacted information. When I did the book on Malcolm and the CIA, I ran into the agency and they were telling me all kind of difficulties on that. And so certain kind of legal ramifications had to be done. And now I'm concerned about that Malcolm had a camera all the time. You know, what about the film footage that he gathered? Dr. King was surrounded by people like Stanley Levinson, the whole Communist Party. You know, what's the connection there? So it's a lot to be unpacked as we understand the demise and death of Dr. King and Malcolm.
Rosemary?
Yeah, I think what we're saying here, and I think he said it, he broke the silence. That is exactly what he did. And by breaking the silence, he linked racism, militarism, and capitalism, right? I also think that I would reframe your question where you said, what role did the US government play? That assumes that the media in this country is nonpartisan, because what the corporate media did, it carried out the role of what the government was doing and saying. It proffered the ideology of this government, as it always does, because the media is not independent. And so you have the situation. There's no opportunity for truth to emerge because the media plays the key role to ensure that the lies continue. And until we have independent media, or even when we did have it, there's always constraints. And I think that's why it's important that this program is being aired on YouTube. And so the Activist News Network, for example. So that's how I would close my comments. To be continued.
Closing on Larry. Which way forward?
Closing remarks?
Yes, sir.
I thought I did that.
Okay, well,
I do another one.
No,
No,
it's all good because you guys, y'all went around so much and covered everything not in order, but that's good. That's improvisation. I like jazz too.
Right. I just want to say, I think that we have to guard against deification of all of our heroes. And I mean all of them. They were all great beyond measure, but they were human beings. They made errors, they made mistakes. And sometimes if you deify people, you overlook their mistakes. I mean, there's a whole discussion to be had about, you know, the whole trade-off between the civil rights leaders, which included Dr. King, and opposition to the war in Vietnam. I mean, there was a trade-off. It was like, don't talk about Vietnam and I'll get the civil rights bill through Congress. That was real. And like I said, SNCC, Stokely Carmichael, even Coretta came out against the war before Dr. King did. I don't know how many people are aware of that. So we have to make that assessment also. But I really think that, you know, we have to fuse theory and practice. We have to really study. I mean, a lot of people listen to one speech by Dr. King or a couple of speeches by King. They think they know everything there is to know about King. And that's not good, you know? I even think that we may need to do a rereading of Paul Robeson's book, Here I Stand, you know? Because to tell the truth, he was more advanced in the 40s. I mean, this pendulum, this ideological pendulum was swinging back and forth. You know, it was swinging back and forth. You know, Du Bois and Robeson, you mentioned William Patterson. They brought the We Charge Genocide petition to the UN. I mean, they were pretty advanced. And then it seems like there was a There was a break there. And then people again in the 60s began to give more attention. They called it what? The new left, right? Because a whole new generation had discovered Marxist ideas and radical ideas, and Pan-African ideas. So, we always have to try to fuse theory and practice, but I think we got to do what we can to preserve the legacy, the radical legacy. And I think Rosemari alluded to this in her very first statement. When she said, you said you got to clean him up, right? You got to not clean up King, but clean up his legacy. Because this is what the ruling class does. When they can't suppress the legacy of a leader, they revise it. What did Lenin say? They make what they did to Marx. They make him into a harmless icon that everybody can love. Most people didn't love Dr. King at the time he was killed. His lowest level of popularity was at the time he was assassinated, because they did such a job character assassinating. New York Times called Dr. King an agent of Hanoi. An agent of Hanoi, because he opposed the war in Vietnam. I believe if Dr. King was alive, that he'd be opposing this wars in Iran, this kidnapping of Venezuela, this strangling of Cuba. He'd be in the forefront. Lord have mercy. You see where Dr. King was in 1968? If he had lived, what would he be like if he was here in the 21st century? He'd be giving us hell. He'd be kicking our behinds. He'd be like, there's more poor people in America today than when I was assassinated. There's more people unemployed than when I was assassinated. The divide between the rich and the poor is the greatest it's ever been in human history. And that has occurred in the last 40 years, the upward redistribution of wealth. So he would probably be kicking our butts if he was still alive today.
Thank you. Folks, unfortunately, we are at that time. What I'm going to do is Sister Tuere is going to do a poem for us to lead us out. And we do have that footage. I'll have Ryan put that on for folks who just want to watch it. But we are officially going to close with Sister Tuere's poem. And we always recognize our captured freedom fighters when we do our programs with the Safiya Foundation and Prison Lives Matter, who actually organized this. We're gonna fix up the film with Ryan, because you get your Mr. Slide presentation with the occupations in the cities, and also we are going to show the video where you actually hear King speak about some of the things that we thought he should talk about. Sister Tuere, could you lead us out with that poem on the last three Panthers, y'all. This is the 60th anniversary of the founding of the Black Panther Party.
Wow.
This year.
Wow.
So 60 years. And we still got 3 Panthers in prison that need to come home. Sister Tuere?
We say their names because silence is a weapon. We say their names because erasure is policy. We say their names because freedom only comes when memory refuses to die. Zulu, Kenny Whitmore, forged in Angola's fire, not born a panther, became one in the belly of the beast. Turned cages into classrooms, turned punishment into political education, built a chapter where hope was supposed to start. Kamau Siddiqui, brother of the breakfast line and the front line, feeding children before sunrise, feeding consciousness before comfort. A teenage Panther who never traded purpose for safety, still standing, even when the state keeps stealing his breath. Mumia Abu Jamal, voice sharper than bars, journalist of the damned and the determined, writing liberation through concrete walls, broadcasting truth from solitary confinement, proof that you can lock a body and never touch a mind. These were not men chasing fame. They were men choosing service. They chose the people over protection. They chose discipline over distraction. They chose love with consequences. They patrolled with books and breakfast, with clinics and courage, with law books and legal pads, with a willingness to stand between us and terror. And for that, they were hunted. They were framed. They were buried alive in paperwork and prisons. They were punished for proving Black people could govern ourselves. They tried to break their bodies with neglect, with delay, with medical abuse, with time as torture. But Panthers are trained for storms, so their spirits stay sharp. Their politics stay clear. Their love stay dangerous. Zulu, Kamau, Mumia. Say it again. Zulu, Kamau, Mumia. That is history. That's urgency. That's strategy. As responsibility. Because elders don't belong in cages. Freedom fighters don't belong in graves made of concrete, and a movement that forgets its warriors forgets itself. We will not forget. We will organize with their names. We will mobilize with their stories. We will build with their discipline. We will love with their courage until keys turn, until doors open, until brothers walk back into sunlight. Say their names. Say them loud. Say them often. Zulu, Kamau, Mumia. Bring them home.
I say. Thank you, everyone. And
all power to the people.
All power. Free them all.
Free the land. Free them all.
Free them all.
Thank you all. And Ryan, you can throw the video on for folks who want to just hear those words from Ken.
All right, sharing it now.
Alute continua. Over and out.
Okay. I don't hear the sound. You don't have no sound, Ryan.
Sound wasn't working?
No, sound didn't come through.
Okay, give me 1 second.
Try one more time. If not, then I know folks got to go.
It looked like the sound was turned down. I was seeing a little icon in the corner, like it was turned down.
This again was supposed to be shown in the very beginning, so we could have referred to it. But
There you go. Let me try again.
Ryan, if it's not going to work, we'll just we'll redo it.
Yeah, just give me 1 second. All right, try one more time. I've sort of recalled that this. Oh, here we go. So, I think it'll work now.
And folks that had questions that didn't get answered, y'all can always send them in, and we'll make sure that we do that.
Sounds working?
Yeah.
All right. Sorry about that, everyone.
got more volume, that would help too.
Others can do what they want to do. That's their business. Other civil rights leaders, for various reasons, refuse or can't take a stand or have to go along with the administration. That's their business. But I must say tonight that I know that justice is indivisible. Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. The world now demands a maturity of America that we may not be able to achieve. It demands that we admit that we have been wrong from the beginning of our adventure in Vietnam, that we have been detrimental to the life of the Vietnamese people. The situation is one in which we must be ready to turn sharply from our present ways. The New Testament says, repent. It is time for America to repent now, for the kingdom of God is at hand. God chose America as his divine messianic force to be a sort of policeman of the whole world. God has a way of standing before the nations with judgment, and it seems that I can hear God saying to America, you are too arrogant. You don't change your ways. I will rise up and break the backbone of your power, and I'll place it in the hands of a nation that doesn't even know my name. We've got some difficult days ahead, but it really doesn't matter with me now, because I've been to the mountaintop. I don't mind. Like anybody, I would like to live a long life. Longevity has its place. But I'm not concerned about that now. I just want to do God's will. And he's allowed me to go up the mountain. And I've looked over. And I've seen the promised land. I may not get there with you, but I want you to know tonight that we as a people will get to the promised land. So I'm happy tonight. I'm not worried about anything. I'm not fearing any man. Mine eyes have seen the glory of the coming of the Lord. You know, several years ago, I was in New York City autographing the first book that I had written. And while sitting there autographing books, a demented black woman came up. The only question I heard from her was, "Are you Martin Luther King?" And I was looking down writing, and I said, "Yes." The next minute, I felt something beating on my chest. Before I knew it, I had been stabbed by this demented woman. I was rushed to Hamm Hospital. It was a dark Saturday afternoon. And that blade had gone through, and the x-rays revealed that the tip of the blade was on the edge of my aorta, the main artery. And once that's punctured, you're drowned in your own blood. That's the end of you. It came out in the New York Times the next morning that if I had merely sneezed, I would have died. Well, about 4 days later, they allowed me, after the operation, after my chest had been opened and the blade had been taken out, to move around in the wheelchair in the hospital. They allowed me to read some of the mail that came in, and from all over the states and the world, kind letters came in. I read a few, but one of them I will never forget. I had received one from the president and the vice president. I've forgotten what those telegrams said. I'd received a visit and a letter from the governor of New York, but I've forgotten what that letter said. Yes. But there was another letter that came from a little girl, a young girl, who was a student at the White Plains High School. And I looked at that letter and I'll never forget it. It said simply, "Dear Dr. King, I am a 9th grade student at the White Plains High School." And she said, "While it should not matter, I would like to mention that I'm a white girl. I read in the paper of your misfortune and of your suffering. And I read that if you had sneezed, you would have died. And I'm simply writing you to say that I'm so happy that you didn't sneeze. And I want to say tonight, that I too am happy that I didn't sneeze, because if I had sneezed, I wouldn't have been around here in 1960, when students all over the South started sitting in at lunch counters. And I knew that as they were sitting in, they were really standing up for the best in the American dream and taking the whole nation back to those great wells of democracy which were dug deep by the founding fathers in the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution. If I had sneezed, I wouldn't have been around here in 1961 when we decided to take a ride for freedom and ended segregation in interstate travel. If I had sneezed, I wouldn't have been around here in 1962 when Negroes in Albany, Georgia decided to straighten their backs up. And whenever men and women straighten their backs up, they are going somewhere, because a man can't ride your back unless it is bent. If I had sneezed, if I had sneezed, I wouldn't have been here in 1963. And the black people of Birmingham, Alabama aroused the conscience of this nation and brought into being the Civil Rights Bill. If I had sneezed, I wouldn't have had a chance later that year in August to try to tell America about a dream that I had had. If I had sneezed, I wouldn't have been down in Selma, Alabama to see the great movement there. If I had sneezed, I wouldn't have been in Memphis to see a community rally around those brothers and sisters who are suffering. I'm so happy that I didn't sneeze. And they were telling me, now it doesn't matter now. It really doesn't matter what happens now. I left Atlanta this morning, and as we got started on the plane, there were 6 of us. The pilot said over the public address system, "We are sorry for the delay, but we have Dr. Martin Luther King on the plane, and to be sure that all of the bags were checked, and to be sure that nothing would be wrong on the plane, we had to check out everything carefully, and we've had the plane protected and guarded all night." And then I got into Memphis, and some began to say the threats, or talk about the threats that were out, or what would happen to me from some of our sick white brothers. Well, I don't know what will happen now, We've got some difficult days ahead. But it really doesn't matter with me now, because I've been to the mountaintop. I don't mind. Like anybody, I would like to live a long life. Longevity has its place. But I'm not concerned about that now. I just want to do God's will. And He's allowed me to go up to the mountain. And I've looked over and I've seen the promised land. I may not get there with you, but I want you to know tonight that we as a people will get to the promised land. So I'm happy tonight. I'm not worried about anything. I'm not fearing any man. Mine eyes have seen the glory of the coming of the Lord. At the very same time that America refused to give the Negro any land, through an act of Congress, our government was giving away millions of acres of land in the West and the Midwest, which meant that it was willing to undergird its white peasants from Europe with an economic floor. But not only did they give the land, they built land-grant colleges with government money to teach them how to farm. Not only that, they provided county agents to further their expertise in farming. Not only that, they provided low interest rates in order that they could mechanize their farms. Not only that, today many of these people are receiving millions of dollars in federal subsidies not to farm, and they are the very people telling the black man that he ought to lift himself by his own bootstraps. And this is what we are faced with, and this is the reality. Now, when we come to Washington in this campaign, we are coming to get our check.
Y'all have a good night. Keep reading your emails, and the struggle continues.
What's the call?
Free them all.
Free 'em all.
Kamau.
Free 'em all.
Kamau.
Free Kamau, free Kamau, free Mumia,
Kamau. Free Mumia. Free Zulu.
free Zulu, free them all. Free Kwame Shakur.
Free Kwame.
Yeah, free Kwame.